fellow cyborgs, and welcome to the first video of the Brontë binge. I'm going to be talking about Wuthering Heights. So this is my third time reading Wuthering Heights. I first had to read it for a Victorian novels class in university. Then I reread it in 2017 in summertime and really enjoyed it, surprisingly so, and that jumped me off into reading Victorian literature like a crazy person for those couple months in the summer. And now I've picked it up again in January of 2019 to start off my Brontë binge. So the first time that I read this, I was not impressed by it. I remembered thinking very unfond thoughts about it, even though I rated it 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, so I don't know where that disconnect happened. I remember even on some tag videos saying that Wuthering Heights is the book that needed to be buried in the basement of libraries because no one should read it. So yeah, I don't understand where all of my animosity came from. You know where I think it came from? It's because Wuthering Heights is falsely touted as one of the greatest love stories in literature, and that is some BS. Wuthering Heights is, I believe, in Katie from Books and Things' top 3 novels of all time, and hearing her talking about Wuthering Heights really made me side-eye the book a little bit differently and pick it up in 2017 to give it a try. She posits that this is not a love story, this is a story about revenge. If you've watched To Walk Invisible, the movie documentary about the Brontë siblings, in that movie, Emily Bronte's inspiration for Wuthering Heights is posited as her exploring how someone can be so consumed with revenge and so full of rage, and how those emotions can come about in a person and exist in a person. So from that documentary movie and Katie, I decided to look at Wuthering Heights from a revenge story sort of perspective. And in 2017, that made me enjoy Wuthering Heights so much more. I was not spending time trying to justify to myself that Heathcliff actually was a romantic hero and excusing his abominable behaviors. Instead, I was spending time reveling in hating some of these characters, but still somehow being invested in them and having feelings about the horrible things that were happening to some of them. Now, upon this third reading, it took me a while to kind of feel connected to the story, and I would say this was almost like a 3 out of 5 star enjoyment sort of experience for me, but I'm still going to keep my rating at 4 out of 5 just for simplicity's sake, I guess, at this point. And I still do think that Wuthering Heights really doesn't deserve to be in the 3 out of 5 star grouping on my Goodreads. It definitely stands up more to a 4 out of 5 sort of book experience. I feel like this story is one that I can return to again and again in my life and have slightly different ideas about, and those are 4-star books, not really 3-star books. I'm assuming you know what Wuthering Heights is about, but if not, let me just give you a quick spiel. The Earnshaw family live in a very secluded part of northern England. There is Wuthering Heights, and then pretty much like one neighboring big house called Thrushcross Grange, hard to say, and then far off, I don't know how many miles, but it's not a hop, skip, and a jump, there's a town called Gimmerton. It is very isolated, it's out on the moors, so the wind and weather is very severe, and it's super just like claustrophobic. At Wuthering Heights live the Earnshaws. There are 2 siblings, Hindley and Kathy, and then one day their father, coming back from a trip to Liverpool, instead of bringing them back the gifts they asked for, kind of like in the fairy tale Beauty and the Beast, he instead brings back an orphan child who seems kind of feral. This orphan child is named Heathcliff, and thus begins this generations-long intense weirdness brought on not only by Heathcliff, but by the tornado, which is Kathy plus Heathcliff, because Kathy is my most hated character in Wuthering Heights. She is kind of like a born sociopath, in my opinion, has no clue why everybody doesn't love her, even though she physically assaults them and is a bit of a jerk. Heathcliff also is a bit of a sociopath, but in my mind, I feel like his traumatic upbringing pre-Earnshaw days could potentially explain, though not excuse, these behaviors. In my opinion, Kathy really doesn't have any excuse. abuse. The story, however, is not told through their perspective. The story opens with Lockwood coming to rent out Thrushcross Grange from Heathcliff, who is the master at Wuthering Heights. This story is recounted by Mr. Lockwood. However, Mr. Lockwood learns about the events of Wuthering Heights and the characters at Wuthering Heights from Nellie Dean, who used to be a housekeeper at Wuthering Heights when Cathy and Heathcliff were growing up, and in fact, she grew up alongside them. So we have this story about Cathy and Heathcliff told through the eyes of the biased perspective of Nellie Dean, told then through the eyes of Lockwood, a man who has really no connection to this family. The cool thing about Wuthering Heights is that this focuses on two generations. So we have Cathy and Heathcliff, and then we have their children, so to speak. I'm not going to tell you whose children, but children end up being born from the Cathy Heathcliff sort of generation group. When I first read Wuthering Heights, I did not understand why there was a second generation. It didn't make any sense to me, especially since I had watched the Laurence Olivier 1939 adaptation of Wuthering Heights, which completely cuts out the second generation, because here's the thing, right? The second generation acts as a foil to the first and showing how events could have been different if these people had made different choices. When you cut out the second generation, you can more easily justify Wuthering Heights being a romantic love story, which it's not. But by cutting out the second generation, you completely miss the point of this. The point of this book is not to prove how romantic Heathcliff is. The point of this book is to explore how Heathcliff became the way he is. So for me, as much as I recognize Heathcliff is a monster I would never want to meet in a dark or bright alley, I also, a part of me, and I think it's the 16-year-old who still lives inside of me and is into emo boys who are broken and she's going to heal them. There are moments in here where Heathcliff is being a little bit of an emo kid, and I just kind of want to, there, Heathcliff, even though I know he'd probably snarl at me because that's what Heathcliff does. So like I said, even the most reprehensible characters in here, Cathy and Heathcliff, at times I felt emotionally invested in them, even though there was no good reason why. And that, I would say, proves mastery of the craft of this novel. A lot of people also love Wuthering Heights because of Emily's use of language. I personally, there are some sections which I kind of bracketed in here that I found really enjoyable to read, but I'm definitely more Team Charlotte when it comes to which Brontë writing style really, gets my jam. But that's also another reason to explore the pages of Wuthering Heights, is a really lovely writing style. Another reason to pick up Wuthering Heights is that this is, if you couldn't tell me talking about Cathy and Heathcliff, this is a very ghoulish sort of novel. There are arguably some supernatural elements in here. The idea of ghosts pervades this entire book, and the behaviors of Heathcliff and Cathy are quite horrific at times. This is an incredibly violent book. And I think that's another really fun thing about Wuthering Heights, is that if it might not be super shocking by today's standards, but if you think about when this was written and the amount of stuff that goes on in here that are super violent, it's amazing that it got published, frankly. But as I am slowly becoming more interested in the horror genre, these violent and ghoulish sort of elements just made me very happy to see. So I think I've blathered on about Wuthering Heights for long enough at this point. It's definitely a book I will be revisiting throughout my life because there are so many different layers and facets to it, and I'm emotionally connected to it whether I want to be or not. So please let me know in the comments down below if you've read Wuthering Heights. Are you camp I like it or camp get it away from me? Because I feel like Wuthering Heights can be a bit divisive like that. If you haven't read Wuthering Heights, are you interested in picking it up? I'm assuming you are, because why would you be watching a review video on Wuthering Heights unless you just really love my face if you weren't interested in this book on its own? Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you look forward to future Brontë binge videos, and until next time, continue to be lovely.